Recording. It can seem easy when we're studying the course to think this course is what's insane because I witness to a world around me, and I believe everybody here witnesses to that same world. We don't call into question its reality, we call into question aspects of it, whether our perceptions might be right about fragments of it, but not its reality. Sure, my senses can get things wrong. I can think I see things that might not be there or hear things that might not be making any sound. But overall, the world is the foundation I stand on. And I believe that's true for everyone else. And if it's not true for some people, they are insane. They're the ones that are out of touch with reality, that don't know what reality is, not me. I'm going to read from chapter 13, The Guiltless World, from the introduction. Because when we really look at it, the world we seem to live in is the impossible belief. And when we read the course, the light of reason can show there must be another world, because this is the world that makes no sense. The world we seem to live in is the one that testifies to cruelty. It does not testify to a loving God. I honestly don't know how people can follow other paths because they would indicate to me that God is cruel. If God created this world, the only conclusion that I could reach would be that he was cruel. So I'm going to read from the second paragraph. The acceptance of guilt into the mind of God's Son was the beginning of the separation, as the acceptance of the atonement is its end. The world you see is the delusional system of those made mad by guilt. Look carefully at this world, and you will realize that this is so, for this world is the symbol of punishment, and all the laws that seem to govern it are the laws of death. Children are born into it through pain and in pain. Their growth is attended by suffering, and they learn of sorrow and separation and death. Their minds seem to be trapped in their brain, and its powers to decline if their bodies are hurt. They seem to love, yet they desert and are deserted. They appear to lose what they love, perhaps the most insane belief of all. And their bodies wither and gasp and are laid in the ground and are no more. Not one of them but has thought that God is cruel. If this were the real world, God would be cruel. So it is the acceptance of guilt that gave rise to the world we see. The world we see is the delusional system of those made mad by guilt. It is the symbol of punishment. Who can argue with that? It is so apparently the symbol of punishment. It is obvious to a casual observer this world is a symbol of punishment. It really can boggle my mind that as a child, even, that I accepted, we have to accept. It's not like we really experience ourselves as having a choice, but we have to accept suffering and pain and sorrow and loss. And sometimes we endure what the world would consider to be evil and horrific acts, or we see that happening to someone else. And all along the way, somehow we're convinced, and it's not because the others are telling us. We become convinced this is the world. This is what I am. I am this limited thing. My grasp cannot exceed the reach of my arm. Everything is about limitation, limitation at every turn. And we don't really stop to consider all the limitations that our clay house involve. Should be intolerable. Our willingness to accept the limitations of what it means to be a body in a world and deal with all of the needs of that body, physically, psychologically, emotionally, educationally, spiritually. The body demands our full attention. And it's like we're all loaded with self-interest and self-obsessed because our bodies demand so much of us. And so we have to pay such close attention to ourselves. And then everybody else gets what's left over. I mean, it's something when you look at it, when you stand back and go, oh my gosh, this is the world I believed in and thought I stood on a solid foundation, even though it's very apparent that throughout our lives, we twist and whirl with the wind. You know, if something happens and we're on our knees, something else seems to happen and we're elated. And we're just at the mercy of these things that seem to be out of our control. And if we believe God made this world, then he would be as careless of us as the weather or the time of day, as the Course says. So going back to the acceptance of guilt in the mind of God's Son, guilt is intolerable. So when we accepted guilt into our mind, it was essential to project that guilt out. Projection, denial, repression is the way we handle the harsh intrusion of guilt. It just destroys peace, and it demands punishment, so it creates terror. That guilt, it is guilt that has obscured the Father to us, and it is guilt that has driven us insane and seemingly out of our minds into a world where we can project guilt outside of us, see the cause of all suffering is outside of us, so we're not the guilty ones. So God won't be rising up for vengeance on us. We won't be the ones burning in hell. That is why we're gleeful when someone gives us an opportunity to point the finger at them and say, oh, you're the guilty sinner, not me. Because it seems to abate that sense of punishment we think is coming for us, even though we don't really remember what we did. The guilt is this ontological, unconscious guilt that is buried in our minds. And we've buried it over so we would not see that we believe we killed God. We believe we destroyed oneness. We stole something and wanted it all for ourselves. We demanded specialness. And when he didn't give it to us, we got it for ourselves by believing in separation. I want to be autonomous. I want to be an individual, but above all, I want to be special. Specialness is the seal of treachery on the gift of love. That's for another day, but I wanted to throw that in because it's such a great line. Okay, so going through the guiltless world. Guilt is intolerable. We project guilt to get rid of it, but we're actually merely concealing it. We don't experience the guilt, but we have no idea why. We do experience the guilt, but we have no idea why. On the contrary, he says, you associate your guilt with a weird assortment of ego ideals, which the ego claims you have failed. Yet you have no idea you're failing the Son of God by seeing him as guilty. Believing you are no longer you, you do not realize you're failing you. So this is what he's saying here is, it's very obvious, but, I will say, I'm not good enough at my job. And so I'm going to associate the guilt I experience with failing that idea that I should be better, or another ego ideal, I should be prettier. I should be kinder. Anything that could cross my mind, as long as I can blame it for my guilt. So these ego ideals, the ego claims you failed. That is a veil or a covering over the fact that we've betrayed ourselves. We have failed ourselves because we do not realize we are the Son of God. That self-betrayal leads to the guilt. The one we have hurt is ourselves. The darkest of your hidden cornerstones holds your belief in guilt from your awareness. For in that dark and secret place is the realization that you have betrayed God's Son by condemning him to death. And who is God's Son? We are God's Son. We have a split mind. We don't know who we are anymore. We have an identity crisis. You do not even suspect this murderous but insane idea lies hidden there, for the ego's destructive urge is so intense, nothing short of the crucifixion of God's Son can ultimately satisfy it. This world is the picture of the crucifixion of God's Son. Crucifixion is the symbol of the ego. When the ego is confronted with the real guiltlessness of God's Son, which depicted in form is the idea of Jesus here as a symbol of being God's Son, it did kill him. The atonement has always been interpreted as the release from guilt, and this is correct if it's understood. Okay, so our fear of atonement, which is the release from guilt, and we cling to guilt because guilt holds our whole world in place. Guilt is the foundation of this world that I separated. I am guilty. Now I fear punishment. So even though we recognize the futility of the ego and we don't want them, we can't look upon the alternative because we are afraid of our own redemption and believe it will kill us. And he says, make no mistake about the depth of this fear, for you believe that in the presence of truth, you might turn on yourself and destroy yourself. And Jesus tries to comfort us here, seeing that in our state of mind and believing in the impossible, we're terrified, absolutely terrified. So he says, little child, this is not so about destroying yourself in the face of truth. Your, quote, guilty secret is nothing. And if you will but bring it to the light will dispel it. And then no dark cloud will remain between you and the remembrance of your Father, for you will remember his guiltless Son, who did not die because he was immortal. And you will see that you were redeemed with him. He also talks about going back to that theme of this world is the impossible thing to believe in, not what Jesus is telling us is the real world. He also talks later on in the Guiltless World, the chapter, on how God could not do this to us. God could not create us and put us in this world. Could he set us apart knowing that our peace lies only in oneness? He denied you only your request for pain, for suffering is not of his creation. That is the demand to be special. That has to be denied because that's a request for pain and suffering and lies instead of truth. Having given you creation, he could not take it from you. He could but answer your insane request with a sane answer that would abide with you in your insanity. And this he did. No one who hears his answer but will give up insanity, for his answer is the reference point beyond illusions from which you can look back on them and see them as insane. But seek this place and you will find it, for love is in you and will lead you there. So what is it? What was our insane request? Specialness. We want specialness to be the truth in us. Separation. So all he could do is provide a sane answer to abide with us in our insanity. And we call that answer the Holy Spirit. But of course, God didn't literally provide us with an answer. God doesn't know of a dream. God knows of oneness. If God knew about the dream, that would lend it reality that it can't have, so that oneness can be the only reality. Non-duality and duality cannot coexist. So only in fantasy and hallucination can duality exist, which non-duality would know nothing about. The presence of the perception of duality is a blocking out of truth. It is a block to the awareness of love's presence. It is a block to the awareness of non-duality. I think that really drives home. I think this whole section really drives home the point that believing in this world is nuts. It doesn't make any sense. How did we ever convince ourselves anything made sense here? Because we wanted to. We learned all the harsh lessons of our world because we wanted specialness to be the truth. We had a willingness to be separate, believing it would bring us happiness, and it did not do that. And now we're going through an awakening. We're awakening to seeing everything anew, exactly the way it is, and not the way we set it up. We set it up to deceive ourselves. I'm going to close with the last a piece of I'm going to read the last paragraph in chapter 13, section 7, Finding the Present. He talks about how not one note in heaven's song was missed because we believe we dreamed a dream. And yet the laws of love are not suspended because you sleep, and you have followed them through all your nightmares, and have been faithful in your giving, for you are not alone. Even in sleep has Christ protected you, ensuring the real world for you when you awake. In your name, he has given for you and given you the gifts he gave. God's Son is still as loving as his Father. Continuous with his Father, he has no past apart from him. So he has never ceased to be his Father's witness and his own. Although he slept, Christ's vision did not leave him. And so it is that he can call unto himself the witnesses that teach him that he never slept. The witnesses will come to prove we never slept. Amen. Thank you for listening.